They say some people are born broken. That violence finds you because you deserve it. That silence is safer than screaming. I believed all of that, until the day a stranger walked into a dying town and paid gold to take me away from hell. This is the story of how I learned that survival isn't living, and how the most dangerous man I ever met became the only one who never hurt me. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The first thing you need to understand about Coldridge is that it's a town built on ghosts, not the supernatural kind, though plenty of superstitious miners would tell you otherwise after too much whiskey, but the kind that lingers in empty storefronts and abandoned mine shafts, the kind that settles into the bones of buildings and people alike, making everything feel half dead even while it's still breathing. The silver ran out in 1889. 23 years later, nobody had bothered to tell Coldridge it was allowed to die. 300 souls remained scattered across a valley that had once promised prosperity and delivered only dust. The mine still operated on the East Ridge, coughing up just enough ore to keep a handful of men employed and a handful more hoping. The rest scraped by on stubbornness and the faint possibility that things might turn around, that the next shaft might strike something worth staying for. They wouldn't. I knew this the way I knew winter was coming when the aspens turned gold, the way I knew my mother's footsteps from 3 rooms away, heavy and deliberate, each one a countdown to whatever fresh hell the day would bring. My name is Elena Ward, and I was 18 years old when I stopped believing in rescue. The shack we lived in sat on the southern edge of town, where the buildings gave up trying to look respectable and simply rotted in peace. It had been a storage shed once, before my mother decided it was good enough for the 2 of us. 1 room. Walls so thin I could hear old man Fletcher coughing himself to death next door every night. A wood stove that worked when it wanted to, and a roof that leaked in 17 places. I'd counted them all, memorized their locations like a map of my own personal purgatory. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when everything changed, though I didn't know it yet. I woke to pain, which wasn't unusual. My left eye was swollen nearly shut, the bruise a spectacular purple-black that spread down my cheekbone like spilled ink. My ribs ached with every breath. Not broken, I didn't think, but badly bruised from where my mother's boot had caught me the night before. My lower lip was split, the cut crusty with dried blood. The mirror above our basin was cracked in 3 places, but I could still see enough to know I looked like hell. "You gonna stand there all day admiring yourself?" My mother's voice cut through the morning silence like a rusty blade. Margaret Ward sat at our excuse for a table, a cigarette dangling from her lips, her eyes already hard despite the early hour. She was 42 but looked 60, her face carved into permanent bitterness by years of disappointment and rage. "No, ma'am," I said quietly, reaching for the threadbare dress hanging from a nail on the wall. "Because if you think you're too pretty to work, I can fix that real quick. I'm going. I just need to—" "You need to shut your mouth and get moving. Phillips expects you at the store by 7, and if you're late again, he'll dock your pay, which means less money for this household, which means—" "I know," I interrupted, immediately regretting it when her eyes flashed. She was on me in 3 steps. The slap caught me across the already bruised cheek, snapping my head to the side and sending bright stars dancing across my vision. I stumbled back against the wall, tasting fresh copper. "You know?" Her voice was low, dangerous. "You know. Then why do I have to tell you every goddamn morning? Why do I have to look at your worthless face and remind you that everything you eat, everything you wear, every breath you take in this house is because I allow it?" I said nothing. Experience had taught me that words only made it worse. "I should have left you at the church," she continued, her voice rising. "Should have walked away the day you were born and never looked back. Do you know what I gave up for you? Do you have any idea what my life could have been?" I'd heard the speech 1,000 times. The words changed, but the message was always the same. I was a burden, a mistake, a chain around her neck that dragged her down into misery. "I'm sorry," I whispered, because it was expected. "Sorry." She laughed, a bitter sound like breaking glass. "You're always sorry, aren't you? Sorry doesn't pay the rent, girl. Sorry doesn't put food on the table. Now get out of my sight before I really lose my temper." I grabbed my coat, thin, patched in multiple places, wholly inadequate for the mountain cold that was already settling into the valley, and fled. Outside, the morning air hit me like a physical blow, sharp and clean after the stale smoke of the shack. I stood on the crooked porch for a moment, breathing carefully through my nose, willing my hands to stop shaking. The sky was just beginning to lighten, deep purple fading to gray at the edges. Coldridge looked almost peaceful in the pre-dawn gloom, the ugliness of decay hidden by shadows and distance. Smoke rose from a few chimneys. A dog barked somewhere toward the center of town. Normal. Everything was normal. I started walking. Phillips General Store sat on Main Street, a generous name for the rutted dirt road that ran through the middle of town. It was one of the larger buildings still operating, a two-story structure with a false front that had been painted optimistic blue sometime in the previous century. The paint was mostly gone now, stripped away by wind and weather, until only ghost traces remained in the protected corners. I'd worked there for 3 years since I was 15. 6 days a week, 7 hours a day, for wages that barely qualified as such. Mr. Phillips paid me half what he paid the men who occasionally helped with heavy deliveries, and a third what he paid his son Robert, who mostly stood around looking important and making comments about my appearance when his father wasn't listening. But it got me out of the shack. That was worth everything. I entered through the back door, as always. The store was dark and quiet, smelling of dry goods and dust and the faint chemical tang of the rat poison Mr. Phillips kept under the counter. I lit the lamps, swept the floor, arranged the canned goods that had gotten disorganized the day before. By the time Mr. Phillips arrived at 8, everything was ready. He grunted when he saw me, his version of a greeting, then stopped short as he got his first good look at my face. "Jesus, girl, what happened to you?" "I fell," I said automatically. "Down the porch steps. It was dark." He studied me for a long moment, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He knew I was lying. He knew exactly where the bruises came from. Everyone in Coldridge knew what Margaret Ward was like, knew what went on in that shack at the edge of town, and like everyone else, he chose not to see it. "You need to be more careful," he said finally, turning away. "Can't have you scaring the customers looking like that." "Yes, sir." "There's inventory in the back that needs organizing. Stay out of sight until the swelling goes down." So I spent the morning in the storage room, counting tins of coffee and bags of flour, listening to the occasional customer come and go. Mrs. Chen buying sugar, old Garrett arguing about the price of tobacco, the Patterson boys loading up supplies for their father's claim up in the hills. Normal. Everything was normal. Around noon, the bell above the front door chimed, and I heard Mr. Phillips' voice change, the particular tone he used when he was nervous. "Can I help you, sir?" The voice that answered was deep, quiet, and unfamiliar. "Need supplies. Got a list." I heard papers rustling, then Mr. Phillips. "This is quite a lot. You planning on feeding an army?" "Planning on winter." Silence. Then, "You're the one staying up at the old Mackenzie place, aren't you? Up above the tree line?" "I am." "That's a hard place to winter. No offense, but most men wouldn't last a month up there once the snow really hits." "I'm not most men." Something in the way he said it made me curious despite myself. I edged toward the storage room door, peering through the gap. The man standing at the counter was enormous. I'd seen big men before. The minds attracted a certain type, all muscle and calluses and rough hands. But this was different. He stood at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the narrow aisle between shelves. He wore a heavy coat made of what looked like wolf fur, dark pants tucked into worn boots, and a hat pulled low over his face. But it was his stillness that struck me most. He didn't fidget or shift his weight or tap his fingers on the counter like most people did while waiting. He simply stood there, solid as a mountain, while Mr. Phillips scurried around gathering items from the list. "Flour, salt, coffee, sugar, beans," Mr. Phillips muttered, setting each item on the counter. "Ammunition, what caliber?" 30-06. "How many boxes?" 5. Mr. Phillips' eyebrows rose, but he didn't comment. He disappeared into the back room, not the one I was in, but the locked storage where he kept ammunition and other expensive items, and returned with the boxes. The pile on the counter grew. Matches, candles, dried meat, rope, lamp oil, medical supplies, bandages, carbolic acid, needle, and thread. That everything? Mr. Phillips asked, tallying numbers on a piece of paper. One more thing. The big man's voice was quiet. You got any books? Books? Mr. Phillips blinked. I've got some almanacs, a Bible, maybe a few, anything. Don't matter what kind. Mr. Phillips disappeared again and returned with a small stack of battered volumes. 2 almanacs, a Bible, a water-damaged copy of Ivanhoe, and something that looked like it might have been a dime novel once. These are all I've got. Most folks around here don't have much use for reading. I'll take them all. The total came to more money than I made in 3 months. The big man pulled out a leather pouch and counted out gold coins without hesitation. Actual gold, not the scrip that the mining company paid in. Mr. Phillips's eyes went wide. I'll need to get you change. This is, keep it, for the trouble. That's very generous, Mr. Hale, Rowan Hale. The name meant nothing to me, but I saw Mr. Phillips stiffen slightly. Right. Well, Mr. Hale, it'll take me a few minutes to get all this packed up for you. Do you want to? I'll wait. And he did, with that same unnerving stillness, while Mr. Phillips bustled around gathering crates and bags. I should have gone back to counting inventory. Should have stayed out of sight like Mr. Phillips had told me to. But something kept me frozen in the doorway, watching this strange giant of a man who bought supplies for a winter alone and paid in gold. Then he turned his head just slightly and looked directly at me. I gasped and jerked back, but it was too late. He'd seen me. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds over the peaks, cold and clear and unsettling in their intensity. They swept over my face once, taking in the bruises, the split lip, the way I was holding myself carefully to protect my ribs. Then he looked away, back to Mr. Phillips, as if I was nothing worth noting. But something had shifted in the set of his shoulders. Something had gone very, very still. The girl, he said quietly. She work here? Mr. Phillips glanced back at me, annoyed. Elena? Yes, she helps out. Why? Looks injured. A long pause. I held my breath. She's clumsy, Mr. Phillips said finally. Falls a lot. You know how young girls are, not paying attention, always daydreaming. She falls a lot. Hale's voice was flat, emotionless. Must be hard being that clumsy. She manages. Another pause, longer this time. I could feel the weight of Hale's attention, even though he wasn't looking at me anymore. Your supplies are ready, Mr. Phillips said, too loudly, too cheerfully. I've got them packed in 3 crates. You'll need a wagon to haul all this. Got one outside. Right, good. Well then, the door chimed again, cutting him off. My mother walked in. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might be sick. She wasn't supposed to be here. She never came to the store during my shift. What was she doing here? Margaret, Mr. Phillips greeted her, his voice carefully neutral. Everyone in town walked carefully around my mother. What can I do for you? Came to collect the girls' wages, she said, her eyes sweeping the store until they landed on me, still half hidden in the storage room doorway. It's payday, isn't it? Not until Friday, Mr. Phillips said. Close enough. I'll take what she's earned so far. Margaret, I really can't. You calling me a liar, Phillips? You saying my own daughter's wages aren't mine to collect? I wanted to disappear. Wanted to melt into the floor and cease to exist. The humiliation of it. My mother coming to take money I'd earned, money I needed to even hope of eventually saving enough to leave this town, was almost worse than the beatings. Almost. Mr. Phillips sighed and reached for the cash box. Fine, but this comes out of Elena's pay. You understand? I'm not giving you extra. I don't need extra. I just need what's mine. I watched as he counted out coins, most of a week's wages, gone in an instant. My mother snatched them up without a word of thanks and turned to leave. Then she saw Hale. She stopped dead, her eyes going wide. For a moment, something like fear crossed her face, the first time I'd ever seen that expression on her. Then it was gone, replaced by the calculating look she got when she sensed opportunity. I don't think we've met, she said, her voice taking on a sickly sweet quality that made my skin crawl. "I'm Margaret Ward. That's my daughter over there. Elena." Hale said nothing. His eyes moved from my mother to me, then back again. "She's a hard worker," my mother continued, moving closer to him. "Maybe a little simple, but she does what she's told. Are you new in town? I don't recognize you." "Passing through," Hale said, his voice colder than the mountain wind. "Well, if you need anything while you're here, anything at all, I'm sure we could work something out." She smiled, showing yellowed teeth. "A man like you, living alone up in the mountains, must get lonely." My stomach turned. I knew what she was suggesting. Knew she'd done it before, with other men passing through town. Knew that working something out meant selling away pieces of my dignity for whatever coins she could extract. But Hale just looked at her with those cold gray eyes and said, "Not interested." Her smile faltered. "Now don't be hasty. Elena's a pretty girl under all those bruises. She cleans up real nice." "The bruises." His voice cut through the air like a blade. "Where'd they come from?" Silence fell over the store like a heavy blanket. My mother recovered quickly. "She told you, she's clumsy. Falls all the time. I've told her to be more careful, but does she listen? Kids these days." "She told me she fell down porch steps," Hale said quietly. "In the dark." "Is that the story?" "That's the truth," my mother snapped. "And I don't appreciate you implying—" "I'm not implying anything." He turned to face her fully, and even though he didn't raise his voice, didn't make any threatening move, my mother took an involuntary step backward. "I'm asking direct. Those bruises on her face, the way she's holding her ribs, that from falling down steps?" The silence stretched out. Mr. Phillips had gone very still behind the counter. I couldn't breathe. Finally, my mother lifted her chin defiantly. "What happens in my house is my business. That girl is mine. I birthed her. I raised her. And if she needs disciplining, that's my right." "You're right." Hale repeated the words like he was tasting something bitter. "That's correct. And unless you're a lawman, which you clearly aren't, you got no say in it." He studied her for a long moment. Then, to my absolute shock, he said, "How much?" My mother blinked. "What? How much for her?" The world seemed to tilt sideways. I grabbed the door frame to steady myself. "I don't— What are you asking?" My mother's voice was cautious now, uncertain. "You said she's yours, that she's property to do with as you please, so I'm asking how much to buy her from you." "You can't buy a person," Mr. Phillips interjected, his voice shaking slightly. "This isn't the old days. There are laws." "She just said the girl belongs to her," Hale interrupted, his eyes never leaving my mother's face. "So either she's a person with rights, in which case beating her is assault, or she's property, in which case she can be bought. Can't be both." My mother's face went through several interesting colors. Then, slowly, a calculating gleam entered her eyes. $100, she said. "Gold." "Mother!" The word burst out of me before I could stop it. "You can't. I'm not—" "Shut up, Elena." She didn't even look at me. $100, and she's yours to do with as you please. I'll even sign papers if you want them. Make it all legal and proper." Hale reached into his coat and pulled out the leather pouch again. He counted out gold coins onto the counter, more money than I'd ever seen in my life. "50 now," he said. "50 more when you bring me signed papers releasing all claim to her. Tonight." "Now wait just a minute." Mr. Phillips tried again. "Deal," my mother said, scooping up the coins. "Where should I bring the papers?" "I'll be at the livery, loading supplies. You got 3 hours." And just like that, I was sold. My mother left without looking back, the coins already disappearing into her coat. Mr. Phillips stood frozen behind the counter, clearly wanting to object, but equally clearly not willing to cross either Hale or my mother. And I just stood there in the storage room doorway, trying to process what had just happened. Rowan Hale turned those storm gray eyes on me. "Get your things," he said quietly. "Whatever you want to keep." I don't have anything." My voice came out barely above a whisper. "Then just yourself." He gestured to Mr. Phillips. "I'll be back for the supplies in an hour. Have them ready." "Mr. Hale," Phillips said desperately, I don't think this isn't right. You can't just buy a girl like she's livestock. There are laws. Are there? Hale's voice was soft, dangerous. Because I've been in this town 3 hours, and I seen two men hit their wives in broad daylight, seen kids with bruises going to school with empty lunch pails, seen more misery and cruelty than most places see in a year. And not once did I see anyone enforcing laws. Phillips said nothing. So forgive me if I don't put much stock in what the law says. Not when everyone in this town knows what goes on in that shack and chooses to look the other way every single day. He picked up his hat from the counter and settled it on his head. 1 hour, Phillips. Have my supplies ready? Then he walked out, leaving me standing there with my entire world shattered around my feet. Mister. Phillips looked at me helplessly. Elena, It's fine, I heard myself say, though nothing was fine and we both knew it. Maybe you should talk to Sheriff Coleman. Maybe he couldn't. I stepped out of the storage room fully, ignoring the pain in my ribs. You know he couldn't, even if he wanted to, which he doesn't. Because that was the truth of Coldridge, the ugly secret everyone knew and no one spoke about. My mother had been beating me for as long as I could remember, and not once had anyone intervened. Not the sheriff, not the doctor, not the minister, not the neighbors who heard me crying through the thin walls. In this town, what happened behind closed doors stayed behind closed doors, no matter how loud the screams got. What are you going to do? Phillips asked quietly. I thought about it. Thought about my options, which were exactly none. I could refuse to go with Hale. And then what? Go back to the shack? Back to my mother, who just sold me for $50 and would be furious when the deal fell through? Or I could run. Leave town with nothing but the clothes on my back, try to make it to… where? The next town was 30 miles away over mountain passes that would be snowed in within weeks. I had no money, no supplies, no survival skills beyond sweeping floors and taking beatings. Or I could go with Hale, a stranger, a giant of a man who lived alone in the mountains and paid in gold, who'd just bought me like property and could do God knows what with me once we were miles from town. But he'd looked at my bruises and gotten angry. He'd looked at my mother and seen her for exactly what she was. He'd spent $100 in gold just to get me away from her. Maybe he had awful plans for me. Maybe I was trading one nightmare for another. But maybe, just maybe, I was trading a certain nightmare for an uncertain future. And uncertain was better than what I had. I'm going to get my things, I told Phillips, such as they are. He nodded slowly. Elena, be careful. We don't know anything about this man. He could be anything, I agreed, but he can't be worse than what I already know. I walked out of Phillips' general store for the last time, my ribs aching, my face throbbing, my entire body trembling with fear and something that might have been hope. The shack was empty when I got there, my mother still out somewhere, probably already spending the gold she'd gotten for selling her daughter. I looked around at the cramped, dirty space that had been my prison for 18 years. I owned almost nothing. A spare dress, worn thin, a pair of boots with holes in the soles, a comb with missing teeth, a small tin box that held the few precious things I'd managed to keep, a button from a dress I'd worn as a child, a feather from a blue jay, a smooth river stone. That was it. That was the sum total of Elena Ward's possessions. I gathered them into a small cloth bundle and stood in the middle of the shack, waiting to feel something. Sadness, maybe. Nostalgia. Some sense of loss at leaving the only home I'd ever known. But all I felt was relief. I walked out and didn't look back. The livery stable was at the north end of town, a weathered barn that housed the few horses and wagons that still operated in Coldridge. When I arrived, I found Hale loading crates into a sturdy wagon hitched to two massive draft horses. He glanced up when I approached, his eyes taking in my pathetic bundle. That everything? I nodded, not trusting my voice. He returned to loading crates with smooth, economical movements. I stood there awkwardly, unsure what to do or say. The silence stretched out between us, broken only by the sounds of work and the occasional snort from the horses. Finally, he spoke. I'm not going to hurt you. I looked up sharply, meeting those storm-gray eyes. I know you got no reason to believe that, he continued, securing a rope around the last crate. But I'm saying it anyway. I didn't buy you to… He paused, seeming to search for words. I didn't buy you for anything except to get you away from that woman. Why? The word came out before I could stop it. He was quiet for a long moment, then, because I know what it's like when nobody helps. When everyone sees and nobody does a damn thing about it. There was something in his voice, old pain, carefully controlled. What happens now? I asked. Now we wait for your mother to bring the papers. Then we leave. Leave to where? My cabin. Up in the high country, above the tree line. It's isolated. Hard living, especially once winter hits full force. But it's safe. Safe. The word sounded foreign, impossible. And then what? I pressed. After we get there? What do you expect from me? He looked at me steadily. Expect you to help with work around the cabin. Cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. In return, you get shelter, food, and nobody lays a hand on you in anger. Ever. That's all? That's all. I wanted to believe him. Wanted it so badly it hurt worse than my bruised ribs. I could run, I said, testing. Once we're away from town, you'd have a hard time catching me in the mountains if I knew where I was going. A slight smile touched his mouth, the first expression I'd seen on his face. You could try. But winter's coming, and these mountains don't forgive mistakes. You'd be smarter to learn the land first, then decide if you want to risk it. Honest. He was being honest with me. We waited. The sun moved across the sky. The livery owner came and went, shooting curious glances our way, but not asking questions. A few townspeople passed by on the street, their eyes lingering on the strange sight of Elena Ward standing next to a mountain of a man in a wagon full of supplies. Let them look. Let them wonder. In a few hours I'd be gone, and Coldridge would forget I ever existed. My mother arrived as the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the street. She carried a piece of paper, official-looking, with elaborate script and signatures. Here, she said, thrusting it at Hale. Legal document saying I release all parental rights and claims to Elena Margaret Ward. Had to get Judge Brennan out of his dinner to sign it. Cost me $3. Hale read it carefully, his expression unreadable. Then he pulled out his pouch and counted out the remaining $50. My mother snatched the coin so fast her hand was a blur. Pleasure doing business with you, she said, not looking at me. Elena, try not to be more trouble for this man than you were for me. And she left, just walked away, $50 richer, without a backward glance at the daughter she'd just sold. I watched her go and felt nothing. No grief, no anger, no sadness. Just a vast, empty relief. Get in the wagon, Hale said quietly. I climbed up onto the hard wooden seat, my bundle of possessions clutched in my lap. Hale swung up beside me with surprising grace for such a large man and took up the reins. Last chance, he said, not looking at me. You want to change your mind? Say so now. I'll leave you the $50 and you can figure out your own path. I thought about it, really thought about it. Then I said, drive. He nodded once and clicked his tongue. The horses started forward, the wagon creaking and swaying beneath us. We rolled through Coldridge as the sun set, painting the dying town in shades of gold and amber that made it look almost beautiful. Past Phillips' General Store, past the shack that had been my prison, past the school I'd attended until I was old enough to work, past the church with its crooked steeple, past all of it, into the growing darkness. No one came out to say goodbye. No one called my name or wished me well or asked if I was all right. Coldridge let me go as easily as it had ignored my suffering, with complete indifference. We took the north road, climbing steadily into the foothills. The temperature dropped as we gained elevation, and I pulled my thin coat tighter, shivering. Without a word, Hale reached behind the seat and pulled out a heavy blanket, handing it to me. Thank you, I whispered. He just nodded and kept driving. The road grew rougher, less maintained. We passed abandoned claims and empty cabins, relics of Coldridge's better days. The forest closed in around us, pine and aspen, dark and deep. Above, the first stars were beginning to appear. I looked back once, seeing the lights of Coldridge fading below us, growing smaller and smaller until they were just pinpricks in the darkness. Then I turned forward and didn't look back again. We drove through the night, the wagon wheels grinding over stone and dirt, the horses breathing steadily, the mountain looming above us like a wall of black against the stars. Hale didn't speak, and neither did I. There was nothing to say. I was Elena Ward, and I was 18 years old, and I had just left behind everything I'd ever known to follow a stranger into the wilderness. I should have been terrified. Instead, wrapped in a borrowed blanket as we climbed toward the unknown, I felt the faint, fragile stirring of something I'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. The darkness swallowed us whole as we climbed higher into the mountains, and with it, every certainty I'd ever known disappeared behind us like smoke. The road, if it could even be called that, became little more than a suggestion carved into the mountainside. Rocks jutted up through the packed earth, forcing the wagon to lurch and sway with each rotation of the wheels. The trees pressed in close on both sides, their branches forming a tunnel overhead that blocked out even the starlight. In the suffocating blackness, I could hear everything. The creak of wood and leather, the huffing breath of the horses, the distant call of some night bird, and underneath it all, the thundering of my own heartbeat. Hours passed. My body ached from the constant jarring, my bruised ribs protesting every bump and jostle. The cold seeped through the blanket, through my thin dress, into my very bones. I'd never been this far from Coldridge, never been anywhere the lights of town couldn't be seen. The vastness of the wilderness around us felt alive, watching, waiting. Hale drove on in silence, his massive frame still and steady beside me. He seemed unbothered by the darkness, guiding the horses with the confidence of someone who'd made this journey 100 times before. Once, when the wagon hit a particularly deep rut and I gasped in pain, he glanced over at me. "We'll stop soon," he said quietly. "There's a flat spot about a mile ahead where we can rest the horses." "I'm fine," I lied, my voice tight. "Didn't ask if you were fine, said we're stopping." True to his word, the road eventually widened into a small clearing. Hale pulled the horses to a halt and set the brake with practiced efficiency. The sudden stillness after hours of movement felt disorienting. "Stay in the wagon," he said, climbing down. "I'll build a fire." I watched as he moved around the clearing, gathering deadfall and kindling with the ease of long practice. Within minutes, he had a small fire crackling in a ring of stones, casting dancing shadows across the trees. The warmth was immediate and glorious. I hadn't realized how cold I'd gotten until heat touched my face. Hale unhitched the horses and led them to the far side of the clearing where a trickle of water ran down through the rocks. He rubbed them down, checked their hooves, murmured to them in that low, quiet voice. They trusted him completely, I noticed. Leaned into his touch, huffed contentedly. Animals knew things about people. That's what old Garrett used to say back in Coldridge, when he wasn't too drunk to make sense. Animals could smell meanness, could sense danger. These horses weren't afraid of Rowan Hale. Maybe I didn't need to be either. "You hungry?" he asked, returning to the fire. I was starving, actually. I hadn't eaten since the previous evening, a thin soup that had been more water than substance. But old habits died hard. "I don't want to be any trouble." He looked at me for a long moment, the firelight turning his eyes from gray to amber. "You keep saying things like that. Like wanting basic human necessities is asking too much." He pulled a pack from the wagon and withdrew some dried meat, a chunk of hard bread, and a canteen. "Eat. It's not a request." The food was simple but good, better than anything I'd had in months. The meat was salty and tough, the bread dense and filling. I tried to eat slowly, tried to maintain some shred of dignity, but hunger won out. I devoured everything he gave me. He watched me without comment, then handed me the canteen. "Water. Drink slow or you'll make yourself sick." The water was cold and clean, tasting of minerals and stone. I drank carefully, remembering a time years ago when I'd gulped water too fast after going without, and spent hours bent over, retching. When I finished, Hale took the canteen back and had a drink himself, then settled against a log near the fire. He pulled out a long knife and a piece of wood and began to whittle, the blade moving in smooth, controlled strokes. I sat in the wagon bed, wrapped in the blanket, and watched him work. The silence should have been uncomfortable, but somehow it wasn't. It was just quiet. Peaceful, even. "Can I ask you something?" I said finally. Can't stop you. Why did you really do it? Buy me from my mother, I mean. You said you know what it's like when nobody helps, but that's not a real answer. His hands stilled on the wood. For a long moment, I thought he wasn't going to respond. Then he said, I had a sister once, younger than me by 4 years, pretty girl, sweet-natured. Our father was a drunk and mean with it. Beat our mother regular, beat us when the mood took him. He went back to whittling, his voice steady and emotionless, like he was reciting facts about strangers. I left home when I was 16, joined the army, figured I'd make something of myself, send money back to help them. I did too, sent half my pay every month for years. The knife bit into the wood with slightly more force. Found out later that my father took every penny and drank it away. And when my sister tried to stop him, tried to hide the money so our mother could buy food, he beat her so bad she never woke up. My breath caught. I'm sorry. She was 14 years old. He looked up, meeting my eyes. And every neighbor, every person who heard her screaming, every single soul in that town knew what was happening and did nothing. Because it was family business. Because my father was charming when he was sober. Because it was easier to look away. Understanding flooded through me. So when you saw me, I saw her. Saw every girl and woman who gets hurt while people make excuses and turn blind eyes. He returned his attention to the wood, shaving off long curls with sharp, precise movements. I can't fix what happened to Mary. Can't bring her back or punish the people who failed her. But I could do something about what I saw in that store today. Even though you don't know me, even though I'm nothing to you. You're a person who deserves better than what you were getting. That's enough. We sat in silence after that, but it felt different now. Less like the quiet between strangers and more like the quiet between people who understood something important about each other. Eventually, my eyes grew heavy. The warmth of the fire, the fullness in my stomach, the bone-deep exhaustion of the day. All of it pulled at me like a tide. Sleep, Hale said, not looking up from his whittling. We've got hours yet before we reach the cabin. I'll wake you when it's time to move. What about you? I'll keep watch. But you must be tired too. Sleep, Elena. His voice was firm but not unkind. I don't need much rest, and these mountains have things in them that would happily make a meal of unguarded travelers. Sleep while you can. I wanted to argue, wanted to insist that I could take a turn at watch, that I wasn't completely useless, but exhaustion won out. I curled up in the wagon bed, wrapped tight in the blanket, and let the crackling of the fire and the quiet sounds of Hale's knife against wood lull me into sleep. I dreamed of falling, of endless darkness, of my mother's voice screaming that I was worthless. I dreamed of bruises that never healed and blood that never stopped flowing. I dreamed of hands reaching for me, hurting me, and no one coming when I cried out. I woke gasping, my heart racing, to find dawn breaking over the mountains. Hale was exactly where he'd been when I fell asleep, still whittling the same piece of wood. The fire had burned down to embers. The horses were already hitched to the wagon, ready to go. Bad dreams? He asked, glancing over. I nodded, not trusting my voice. They'll pass. Give it time. He stood, stretching his massive frame, and kicked dirt over the fire remains. We should get moving. Got another 3 hours of climbing ahead of us, and the road gets worse from here. Worse than last night? A slight smile touched his mouth. That wasn't the road. That was the easy part. He wasn't lying. The path we followed barely deserved the name. It switchbacked up the mountainside at steep angles, with drops on one side that fell away into nothing. The wagon wheels came within inches of the edge more times than I could count. I found myself holding my breath, gripping the seat so hard my knuckles went white. But Hale drove on calmly, expertly, like this was nothing more challenging than a Sunday ride through town. The horses trusted him completely, following his commands without hesitation, even when the path seemed impossible. As we climbed, the forest changed. The thick pine and aspen gave way to twisted, stunted trees that clung to the rocks like desperate hands. The air grew thinner, colder, sharper. My ears popped from the altitude. In the distance, I could see snow on the highest peaks, brilliant white against the deep blue sky. How much farther? I asked, my voice barely audible over the grinding of wheels on stone. See that ridge? Hale pointed to a rocky outcropping far above us. Just beyond that. Another hour, maybe less. An hour turned into 2. The sun climbed higher, and with it my anxiety grew. What was I doing? I'd traded the certainty of one hell for the complete unknown of another. I knew nothing about this man except that he'd been kind to me once and told me a story about his dead sister. That wasn't enough to build trust on. That wasn't enough to justify following him into literal wilderness. But what choice did I have? Go back? To what? To whom? No. There was no going back. There was only forward into whatever came next. Finally, mercifully, the path leveled out. We crested the ridge Hale had pointed to, and suddenly the world opened up. Before us stretched a high alpine valley, small and hidden, ringed by peaks that touched the clouds. A stream ran through the center, its water so clear I could see rocks on the bottom from 50 feet away. Sparse grass grew in patches, interspersed with wildflowers that somehow survived this high up, and at the far end of the valley, built against the base of the mountain itself, stood a cabin. It was bigger than I'd expected. Solid log construction, with a stone chimney rising from one end and what looked like a covered porch wrapping around 2 sides. Glass windows, actual glass, not oiled paper like we'd had in Coldridge, reflected the morning sun. A woodshed stood nearby, along with what might have been a small barn or storage building. "Welcome home," Hale said quietly. Home. The word felt foreign, impossible. We crossed the valley slowly, the wagon wheels cutting through grass still wet with morning dew. As we got closer, I could see more details. The cabin was well maintained, the logs chinked tight against the weather, the roof made of overlapping shingles that would shed snow. Someone had built raised garden beds near the south wall, though they were empty now, ready for winter. Hale pulled the wagon up to the porch and set the brake. "I'll start unloading. You can go inside, look around. Door's not locked." "You don't lock your door? Who's going to break in? Nearest person is 30 miles away down a path that kills men who don't know what they're doing. And anything with 4 legs that might try to get in would have to get through walls 2 feet thick." Fair point. I climbed down from the wagon carefully, my legs stiff from hours of sitting. The porch steps were solid under my feet, the boards worn smooth but well made. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The cabin was a single large room with a sleeping loft above. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, with cooking implements hanging from iron hooks. A sturdy table and chairs occupied the center of the space. Shelves lined the walls, holding books, tools, supplies. A bed frame stood in one corner. Just the frame, no mattress. The floor was planked wood, clean and level. But what struck me most was the light. Windows on 3 sides let in the mountain sun, filling the space with a warm glow that made everything feel open and bright. After years in that dark, cramped shack, the difference was staggering. I walked slowly around the room, touching things tentatively. Everything was well made, solid, built to last. This wasn't a temporary shelter or a barely standing hovel. This was a home, built with care and skill by someone who intended to stay. "What do you think?" I turned to find Hale standing in the doorway, a crate of supplies balanced on one shoulder like it weighed nothing. "It's beautiful," I said honestly. He looked surprised, then pleased. "It's practical, but I suppose it's nice enough." He set the crate down near the shelves. "There's a loft upstairs. That'll be your space. I sleep down here. There's a spring about 50 yards west of the cabin. Best water you'll ever taste. Outhouse is behind the woodshed, and before you ask, yes, it's clean, and yes, it has a door that latches." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I hadn't been about to ask, but I appreciated knowing. "I've got several more loads to bring in," he continued. "After that, I'll show you around properly, explain how things work. For now, just rest. You look like you're about to fall over." He wasn't wrong. Now that we'd stopped moving, exhaustion hit me like a physical blow. Every ache, every pain, every hour of fear and stress from the past day crashed down at once. "The loft," I said weakly. "Up those stairs." He pointed to a ladder built into the wall. "There's blankets and such up there already. Make yourself comfortable." I climbed the ladder on shaking legs. The loft was smaller than the main room but still generous, with a sloped ceiling that followed the roofline. A mattress lay on the floor, topped with what looked like a bearskin and several wool blankets. A small trunk sat in one corner. A window looked out over the valley. I collapsed onto the mattress and was asleep before Hale finished bringing in the second crate. When I woke, the sun was low in the sky, painting the loft walls with golden light. I could hear movement below, the scrape of wood on wood, the clank of metal, the steady rhythm of work being done. I climbed down the ladder to find the cabin transformed. All the supplies had been unpacked and organized with military precision. Flour, salt, sugar, and other dry goods filled the shelves. The crate of books sat near the fireplace. The ammunition had been stored somewhere out of sight. A fire crackled in the hearth, and something that smelled absolutely divine bubbled in a pot hanging over the flames. Hale stood at the table, sharpening a knife on a whetstone. He looked up when he heard me descend. "Good. You're up. Stew's almost ready." "I slept the whole day." Guilt flooded through me. "I should have been helping you unload. You should have been resting, which is exactly what you did." He tested the knife edge with his thumb, nodded in satisfaction, and set it aside. "You're no use to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." "But Elena." He looked at me directly, his gray eyes serious. "We're going to need to establish some things right now, at the start, so there's no confusion later." My stomach clenched. Here it comes, I thought. Here's where he tells me what he really expects, what he really wants from me. "First," he said, "you're not a servant. You're not property, despite what that paper your mother signed says. You're a person, and you'll be treated as such." I blinked, not sure I'd heard correctly. "Second, you pull your weight, but so do I. This is a partnership of necessity. I need help running this place, and you need somewhere safe to be. That means we both work, we both contribute, we both get say in how things operate." "I don't understand." "What's not to understand? You help with cooking, cleaning, maintaining the cabin. I handle the heavy labor, hunting, making sure we don't freeze or starve. We both do our part." "But you paid for me. I paid to get you away from someone who was killing you by inches," he interrupted. "I don't own you any more than you own me. That clear?" It wasn't clear. Nothing about this was clear. In my experience, men didn't do things without expecting something in return. Men didn't pay gold just to be kind. There had to be an angle, a catch, something I wasn't seeing. He must have read the doubt on my face because he sighed and ran a hand through his dark hair. "Look, I know you got no reason to trust me. I know everything you've experienced has taught you that people, especially men, are cruel and dangerous. And I'm not going to stand here and make promises about how different I am." He paused. "But I will say this. Watch what I do, not what I say. Give it a week, a month, however long you need. If at any point you decide I've lied to you or broken my word, the door's right there. I won't stop you from leaving. Even though you paid $100 for me. Consider it a donation to the Getting Elena Ward Away from a Terrible Situation Fund. Money well spent, regardless of what happens next." He turned back to the fire, stirring the stew. "Now come eat. We can talk more after you've got food in you and your head's clearer." The stew was thick with meat and vegetables I didn't recognize, seasoned with herbs that made my mouth water. We ate in silence at the table, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the scrape of spoons against bowls. It was the best meal I'd ever had. After we finished, Hale showed me how things worked in the cabin, where he kept the spare lamp oil, how to work the fireplace damper, which shelf held the medical supplies. He explained that water from the spring needed to be carried in buckets, that firewood had to be restocked daily, that certain shutters needed to be closed at night to keep the heat in. "Winter up here is no joke," he said seriously. "Temperature can drop to 20 below zero. Wind can blow hard enough to strip skin. Snow can pile up 10 feet deep in a single storm. Everything we do from now until spring is about survival." "How do you survive up here alone?" "Preparation, planning, discipline." He gestured to the shelves of supplies. "I've got enough food stored to last 2 people 6 months if we're careful. Enough firewood to keep us warm through the worst of it. Enough ammunition to hunt when the weather permits. And enough knowledge to not make stupid mistakes that get you killed." "And you're willing to share all that with me? Someone you just met?" He looked at me for a long moment. "I told you, I can't save my sister, but maybe I can do right by someone else who needed help. That enough of a reason for you?" It should have been. It was generous, more than generous. But years of abuse had taught me to look for hidden traps, to never accept kindness at face value. "What if I can't do it?" I asked quietly. "What if I'm not strong enough, or smart enough, or useful enough? What happens then?" "Then we figure it out together. Elena, you survived 18 years with a woman who beat you daily in a town that pretended not to notice. You're plenty strong and plenty smart. You just need time to remember that." Something in my chest cracked open at those words. I felt tears burning behind my eyes and fought them back. "Don't," I said, my voice breaking. "Don't be kind to me. I don't know how to handle kindness." "Then I guess you'll learn." He stood from the table. "I'm going to check on the horses and make sure everything's secured for the night. You should get some more rest. Tomorrow we start teaching you how to live up here." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. I sat at the table in the firelight, tears finally spilling down my cheeks, and for the first time in my life, they weren't from pain or fear. They were from the terrifying, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, life could be different than what I'd always known. The next morning, Rowan woke me before dawn. "Up," he called from below. "Daylight's burning and we've got work to do." I climbed down the ladder, still groggy, to find him already dressed and ready, a cup of something hot waiting for me on the table. "Coffee," he said. "Real coffee, not the chicory nonsense they sell in town. Drink it, then get dressed warm. We're going to walk the perimeter." "The perimeter?" "The valley. You need to know the land, know where the safe paths are. Know where the dangers lie. Can't have you wandering off and falling into a ravine or getting lost in a whiteout." The coffee was bitter and strong, sending heat through my body like liquid fire. I dressed in my spare dress, my patched coat, my boots with holes. Rowan looked me over and shook his head. "That won't do. Hang on." He disappeared into a storage trunk and emerged with clothes I'd never seen before. Heavy wool pants, a thick shirt, a coat made of some kind of fur, boots that looked sturdy and whole. "These were my sisters," he said quietly. "I kept them. Couldn't bear to get rid of them. I think she'd want you to have them." I took them with shaking hands. "Are you sure?" "She was about your size, and she's past needing them." His voice was gruff. "Put them on. They'll keep you alive up here better than those rags." The clothes fit reasonably well, a bit loose, but nothing that wouldn't work. The coat was warm beyond anything I'd ever worn, lined with fur that felt like heaven against my skin. The boots were solid and waterproof. "Better," Rowan said when I emerged. "Now you look like you might survive a week up here. Come on." We spent the morning walking the valley. Rowan pointed out landmarks, the spring where we got water, the best places to find firewood, the paths that were safe, and the ones that would kill you if you took a wrong step. He showed me animal tracks and explained what made them. He pointed out edible plants and poisonous ones. "This," he said, indicating a cluster of low-growing berries, "will keep you alive if you're desperate. But these," he pointed to similar-looking berries 10 feet away, "will kill you in about 6 hours. Know the difference." I tried to absorb everything, knowing my life might depend on it. We walked for hours, circling the entire valley. By the time we returned to the cabin, my legs were aching and my head was spinning with information. "That's enough for today," Rowan said. "Tomorrow we'll start on practical skills, fire building, water purification, basic medicine. By the time winter really hits, you'll know enough to survive on your own if you have to." "Why would I need to survive on my own?" He looked at me seriously. "Because I'm being hunted, Elena. I told you I had a past. Men with power and money want me dead, and they've got long reaches. If they find me up here, things will get violent fast. You need to be able to run, to hide, to survive without me." "What did you do that made them want you dead?" "I was a captain in the army, good at my job, decorated, respected. Then I got orders I couldn't follow, orders that would have meant murdering civilians, burning villages, killing children." His jaw tightened. I refused, reported my commanding officer for war crimes, and in return they framed me for treason, court-martialed me, and sentenced me to hang. "But you're here." "I escaped, killed 3 men doing it, which makes me a murderer in their eyes. Been running ever since. This cabin, this valley, it's as far from civilization as I could get. Thought maybe they'd give up, move on to easier targets. He shook his head. But men like that don't give up. Eventually they'll come. Fear gripped me. Maybe we should leave. Go somewhere else, somewhere farther. There is nowhere farther. This is the end of the line. He looked at me steadily. I won't lie to you, Elena. Being here with me puts you in danger. If you want to leave, go back to town or try to make it somewhere else, I'll understand. I'll even give you supplies, teach you what you need to know. But if you stay, you need to understand what you're staying for. I thought about it, really thought about it. Then I said, I'll stay, and I'll learn everything you can teach me, because if they come, I want to be ready to fight. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. All right then, let's get to work. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Wake before dawn, eat a quick breakfast, then train. Rowan taught me everything he knew, how to build a fire in wind and snow, how to purify water, how to dress a wound, how to shoot a rifle, how to track and be tracked, how to read the weather in the clouds, and the behavior of animals. He was a patient teacher, but demanding. When I failed, he made me try again. When I succeeded, he pushed me harder. Good isn't good enough, he'd say. Up here, good gets you killed. You need to be excellent. At night, we'd eat dinner, and he'd read aloud from the books he'd bought. Adventure stories, philosophy, history. His voice was low and steady, filling the cabin with words that transported us far from the mountain cold. Slowly, carefully, I began to trust him. He never raised a hand to me, never spoke to me with cruelty, never demanded anything beyond honest effort. When I flinched at sudden movements, he moved slower. When I struggled with a task, he broke it down into smaller pieces. When I had nightmares and woke screaming, he'd call up to the loft in that calm voice, "You're safe, Elena. Just dreams. You're safe." 3 weeks passed. The snow began to fall in earnest, blanketing the valley in white. The temperature dropped until our breath frosted in the air even inside the cabin. Winter had arrived, sealing us into our high mountain sanctuary. And then, on a morning when the sky was gray and heavy with the promise of storm, Rowan saw something that made him go very still. "Elena," he said quietly, "get the rifle. We have company." I grabbed the rifle from where it hung above the door, my hand steady despite the ice flooding through my veins. 3 weeks of training had taught me not to hesitate, not to question. When Rowan gave an order in that particular tone, you followed it. "How many?" I asked, moving to the window he was watching from. 6, maybe 7, hard to tell with the trees. His eyes never left the distant tree line where the valley path emerged. "They're trying to be quiet about it, staying in cover, professional." I looked where he was looking and saw nothing at first. Then, there. A flash of movement, dark against the white snow. Then another, farther to the left. They were spreading out, flanking the cabin. "Military?" My voice was steadier than I felt. "Or close enough to it? Government men, probably. The kind they send when they want something done quiet and permanent." He moved away from the window, his movements quick and economical. "Listen carefully. We've got maybe 10 minutes before they're in position. Here's what's going to happen." He pulled up a section of floorboard near the fireplace, revealing a hollow space underneath. Inside was a pack, already prepared, along with a revolver and ammunition. "If I tell you to run, you take this pack and go out the back window. There's a path behind the woodshed that leads up to the ridge. Follow it until you reach the 3 dead pines. You remember them?" I nodded. We'd passed them 2 days ago during one of our perimeter walks. "From there, head east along the ridge until you find the cave I showed you. It's stocked with supplies, enough for 2 weeks if you're careful. Wait there. If I don't come for you in 3 days, head down the mountain. Don't go back to Coldridge. Go west, to Denver. There's a man there named Marcus Chen who runs a boarding house on Larimer Street. Tell him I sent you. He'll help you disappear." "I'm not leaving you." "Elena, no." I checked the rifle's chamber, making sure it was loaded. "You taught me to fight. You taught me to shoot. I'm not running while you face them alone." He looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable in his gray eyes. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "All right. But you follow my lead. You do exactly what I say, when I say it. Understood?" "Understood." "Good. He pulled 2 more rifles from their hiding places, along with boxes of ammunition. They'll try to talk first. They always do. Want to make it official, read charges, pretend this is legal, don't believe a word of it. The second they have a clear shot, they'll take it. He positioned me at the window facing south, where I had a clear view of the approach. He took the north window himself. The cabin's thick log walls would stop most bullets, and the windows were narrow enough to provide good cover while allowing us to shoot out. "You ever kill anyone?" he asked, his voice casual, like he was asking about the weather. "No. Might have to today. You ready for that?" Was I? A month ago, I'd been a girl who flinched at raised voices. Now I was holding a rifle, preparing to shoot at men who wanted to kill the first person who'd ever shown me genuine kindness. "I'm ready," I said, and meant it. The minutes crawled past. I could see the shapes moving through the trees now, getting closer. They were good, staying low, using cover, but the fresh snow betrayed them. 6 men, definitely 6, all armed with rifles. When they were 50 yards out, one of them stepped into the open. He was tall and lean, wearing a heavy coat and a hat with a badge pinned to it, some kind of marshal or federal agent. "Rowan Hale," he called out, his voice carrying across the snow. "This is Deputy Marshal Thomas Garrett. I have a warrant for your arrest. Come out peacefully, and no one needs to get hurt." Rowan didn't answer, just watched with those cold gray eyes. "We know you're in there, Hale. We've been tracking you for months. There's no escape this time. You're surrounded." Still nothing from Rowan. "We don't want trouble," Garrett continued. "We just want you to face justice for your crimes. Come out with your hands up, and we can do this civilized." I saw Rowan's jaw tighten, saw his finger move to rest against the trigger guard. "You've got 1 minute to come out," Garrett said, his voice hardening. "After that, we're coming in." "They're lying," Rowan said quietly, speaking to me, "about wanting to take me alive. Look at their positions." I looked. The men had spread out in a semicircle, all with clear firing lanes toward the cabin. Not an arrest formation, an execution formation. "When the shooting starts, it's going to be loud and fast and confusing," Rowan continued, his voice calm. "Don't think, just shoot. Aim center mass. And Elena," he glanced over at me. "Thank you for staying." 30 seconds, Hale," Rowan raised his voice then, loud enough to carry. "You want me, Garrett? Come and get me. But know this, I'm not the man I was when you framed me. I've got nothing left to lose and no reason to go easy on anyone stupid enough to come through that door." "Have it your way." Garrett stepped back into cover. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. The world held its breath. Then the windows exploded inward in a hail of gunfire. I dropped below the sill as bullets tore through the air above me, shattering glass, splintering wood. The sound was deafening, a continuous roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I could smell gunpowder, sharp and acrid. Rowan was already shooting back, his rifle barking methodically. 1 shot, shift position, another shot. Calm and controlled even in chaos. I forced myself up, found a target, one of the men breaking from cover, running toward the cabin. I put the front sight on his chest and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against my shoulder. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard a cry. The man went down, clutching his leg. Not a kill shot, but enough to stop him. "Good!" Rowan shouted. "Keep shooting!" I worked the bolt, chambered another round, found another target. This time I aimed better. The man dropped and didn't get up. Something shifted in my chest. Not guilt, not horror. Just a cold, distant understanding that these men had come to kill us, and I was simply refusing to die. The gunfire intensified. They were getting braver, moving closer. I saw movement at the corner of the cabin, someone trying to flank us. I fired through the wall, the heavy bullets punching through the logs. A scream told me I'd hit something. "They're going for the door," Rowan warned. I spun, saw 2 men rushing the front porch. Rowan shot one, but the other made it to the door and hit it with his shoulder. The heavy bar held, but barely. "Fall back to the second position," Rowan ordered. We'd planned for this. I grabbed the ammunition and scrambled up the ladder to the loft while Rowan provided covering fire. From up here, I had a better angle, could see over the windowsills to the men taking cover below. The man at the door hit it again. This time, the bar cracked. Rowan shot him through the door, then joined me in the loft, dragging up more ammunition and the 2 spare rifles. "They're going to try to burn us out," he said, reloading with practiced speed. "See that one by the tree? He's got something in his hand, probably lamp oil or pitch." I saw him, a younger man, maybe 30, with a tin can and what looked like a rag. He was waiting for covering fire to make his move. "I've got him," I said. "You sure?" I lined up the shot. The man stepped out from behind the tree, arm cocked back to throw. I led him slightly, accounting for movement and distance, and fired. He dropped the can and fell. The liquid splashed across the snow, dark against white. "Damn," Rowan said with something like approval. "That was a hell of a shot." But we weren't winning. There were still 4 of them, and we were trapped in the cabin. Eventually, they'd find a way to burn us out or wait until we ran out of ammunition. "We need to change the dynamic," Rowan said, reading my thoughts. "Right now they've got us pinned. We need to make them react instead of act." "What do you have in mind?" He looked at me with those storm gray eyes. "Something stupid and dangerous. You trust me?" "With my life." "Then here's what we're going to do." The plan was insane, but then again, everything about the past month had been insane, so why stop now? Rowan would create a distraction at the front of the cabin, shooting, throwing things, making noise. While they focused on him, I would slip out the back window, circle around using the terrain as cover, and get behind them. Once in position, I'd open fire from their rear. Caught between 2 shooters, they'd either have to retreat or split their focus, giving us the advantage. "You'll be exposed out there," Rowan warned. "If they see you before you're in position, they'll cut you down." "Then I won't let them see me." He pulled me close, fierce and sudden, and pressed his forehead to mine. "You come back alive, you hear me? Whatever happens, you survive this." "Same goes for you." He released me and moved to the ladder. "Give me a 3 count after the shooting starts, then go. And Elena, make every shot count." I watched him descend, watched him take position at the shattered window, watched him take a deep breath and steady himself. Then he opened up with both rifles, shooting so fast I couldn't believe it was just one man. The noise was incredible, bullets hammering out in a continuous stream. 1, 2, 3. I dropped out the back window into the snow, rifle clutched tight, and started moving. The storm was picking up, snow falling thick and fast, which was both blessing and curse. It hid me, but it also made it harder to see. I kept low, using every bit of cover, rocks, trees, the terrain itself. Behind me, the gunfight continued, Rowan's rifles singing their deadly song. I circled wide, climbing slightly to gain the high ground. My heart hammered, but my hands were steady. Fear was there, hovering at the edges, but I pushed it down. There would be time for fear later. Right now, I needed to be cold and precise. Through the snow, I saw them. 3 men in a cluster, focused entirely on the cabin, firing steadily. The 4th was off to the side, reloading. I picked my first target carefully, the one on the left, partially hidden behind a tree. I aimed for center mass, just like Rowan had taught me. The rifle kicked. The man fell. The other spun, confused, trying to locate where the shot had come from. I was already moving, chambering another round, finding new position. Second shot. The man reloading went down. Now they knew where I was. Bullets tore through the trees around me, throwing up sprays of bark and snow. I dropped flat, rolled, came up shooting. Third shot. A miss, but close enough to make them flinch. From the cabin, Rowan's fire intensified. Caught between us, the remaining 2 men broke. One tried to run and Rowan dropped him. The other threw down his rifle and raised his hands. "Don't shoot!" he screamed. "Don't shoot! I surrender!" I kept my rifle trained on him as I approached, circling to keep him in view while checking the others. 3 dead, 1 wounded, the first man I'd shot, still clutching his leg. The one at the door, the one with the oil can, and the 2 I'd just killed. Marshal Garrett was the one still standing, hands raised, his face pale. Rowan emerged from the cabin, rifle leveled. "Get down on your knees, hands behind your head." Garrett complied slowly, his eyes darting between us. "You've made a big mistake," he said, trying for authoritative but landing somewhere near terrified. "Killing federal marshals. That's a death sentence. They'll hunt you to the ends of the earth for this." You weren't here to arrest me, Rowan said coldly. You were here to execute me. Big difference. We had a warrant for my arrest, maybe. But those orders you're carrying, the ones in your inside coat pocket, those say something different, don't they? Garrett's eyes widened. I know how this works, Rowan continued. I know they sent you with official papers and unofficial orders. Bring Hale back for trial if possible, but if things go sideways, make sure he doesn't come back at all. Am I wrong? Silence. Let me see the papers, I said suddenly. Rowan glanced at me, surprised. If he's got orders to kill you, we need proof. Otherwise, it's just our word against theirs. I moved closer to Garrett, rifle never wavering. Slowly, 2 fingers. Take out whatever papers you're carrying. Garrett hesitated, then reached into his coat. He pulled out a leather folder and dropped it in the snow. I picked it up, flipped it open. Inside were 2 sets of documents. The first was exactly as advertised, a warrant for Rowan Hale's arrest on charges of treason, murder, and desertion. Official seals, proper signatures, all very legal. The second document was different. Handwritten, no seals, just a short letter on military letterhead. I read it aloud. Deputy Marshal Garrett, your primary objective is the apprehension of the fugitive Rowan Hale. However, given the dangerous and remote nature of his location and the likelihood of violent resistance, you are authorized to use lethal force at your discretion. If the subject is killed in the process of arrest, ensure there are no witnesses and file a report indicating he was shot while attempting to escape. His death is preferable to a trial that might expose certain irregularities in his court-martial. Signed, Colonel Richard Hartwell, Department of Military Justice. The words hung in the air like smoke. They were never going to let you face trial, I said, looking at Rowan. They were always going to kill you. I know. His voice was flat, emotionless. I've always known. He turned his attention back to Garrett. How many more are coming? How many teams did they send? Just us, Garrett said quickly. I swear, just the 6 of us. You're lying. I'm not. We were the only team authorized for this region. Check my papers. There's a duty roster. I looked. He was right. Just 6 names, 6 men authorized for this mission. I showed it to Rowan. Could be more teams in other regions, Rowan mused. Could be they'll send reinforcements when you don't report back. Please, Garrett said, his voice breaking. I was just following orders. I didn't know. I thought we were really here to arrest a dangerous fugitive. And when you got the letter telling you to make sure I died, what did you think then? Garrett had no answer for that. Rowan stood there for a long moment, rifle pointed at the marshal's head, his finger on the trigger. I could see the war happening behind his eyes. The easy thing would be to pull the trigger, eliminate the witness, remove the problem. But Rowan Hale wasn't a man who did the easy thing. Get up, he said finally. You're going to help us with something. We made Garrett drag the bodies of his men into a line near the tree line, while Rowan and I kept watch. The wounded man had bled out while we were talking, so there were 5 dead in total. 5 men who'd come to kill us, and ended up dead in the snow instead. I should have felt something. Horror, guilt, remorse. But looking at them, all I felt was a grim satisfaction that I was still breathing and they weren't. What now? I asked Rowan quietly while Garrett worked. Now we disappear. He looked at the cabin, at the home he'd built, and I saw genuine pain cross his face. We can't stay here. Even if this was the only team, they'll send more when these men don't report. And now they know for certain I'm here. Where do we go? Higher. There are places in these mountains that don't show on any map, places so remote and harsh that even desperate men won't follow. I was saving them for if things got truly desperate. He looked at me. Things just got desperate. When Garrett finished, Rowan made him kneel again. You're going to take a message back, Rowan said. You're going to tell Colonel Hartwell and anyone else who asks that Rowan Hale is dead. You're going to tell them he died in a blizzard before you could even reach the cabin. You're going to tell them that you searched for days but found nothing but an empty cabin and old tracks. They'll never believe that, Garrett protested. They'll want proof, bodies. Then you better be convincing. Rowan's voice was ice. Because if they send more men after me, if I see one more federal badge in these mountains, I'm going to assume you didn't deliver my message. And I'm going to come find you, wherever you are, and I'm going to make you regret it. Are we clear? Garrett nodded frantically. Good. Now get out of my sight. Head down the mountain and don't look back. If I see you again, you're dead. Garrett ran. He didn't even look back at his dead companions, just took off down the valley path at a stumbling run, disappearing into the falling snow. You think he'll do it? I asked. Lie for us? He'll try. Whether they believe him is another question. Rowan turned back to the cabin. We've got maybe 12 hours before this storm really hits. We need to gather what we can carry and get moving. Moving where? I told you, higher. Above the perpetual snow line to a place I found 2 years ago. It's barely more than a cave, but it's defensible and completely hidden. We can wait out the winter there, then decide what comes next in spring. We worked quickly, packing supplies into 2 large rucksacks. Food, ammunition, medical supplies, warm clothes, fire-starting materials, tools. Everything else, the books, the furniture, the life Rowan had built, had to be left behind. Before we left, Rowan did something that surprised me. He took a tin of lamp oil and splashed it across the cabin floor, over the walls, across the supplies we couldn't carry. What are you doing? I asked. Making sure they don't find anything useful if they come looking. He struck a match. If Garrett's lying, if they send more men, I want them to find exactly what he said they'd find. An empty, burned cabin and no sign of where we went. He dropped the match. The fire caught instantly, spreading fast across the oil-soaked wood. We stood outside and watched Rowan's home burn, the flames bright against the darkening sky, smoke rising to mingle with the falling snow. I'm sorry, I said quietly, that you're losing this because of me. He looked at me sharply. This isn't because of you. This is because men with power hate being defied, because they'd rather kill an honest man than admit they were wrong. Don't you dare take responsibility for their evil. The cabin was fully engulfed now, the heat intense even from 20 feet away. The glass windows popped and shattered, the roof timbers groaned. Come on, Rowan said, shouldering his pack. We've got a long climb ahead of us and the storm's getting worse. We left the burning cabin behind and headed up, into the high peaks, into the killing cold. The path, if it could even be called that, was barely visible under the falling snow. We climbed in single file, Rowan breaking trail, me following in his footsteps. The wind picked up, howling through the rocks, cutting through even our heavy coats. We climbed for hours. The altitude made every breath a struggle, every step an effort. My legs burned, my lungs ached, frost formed on my eyelashes. But I kept moving, kept putting one foot in front of the other, because stopping meant dying. Rowan paused once, checking his bearings against landmarks I couldn't see in the storm. Then he nodded and continued on, angling northeast toward what looked like a sheer cliff face. Almost there, he called back, his voice barely audible over the wind. The cliff face turned out to be an optical illusion. As we got closer, I could see a narrow split in the rock, barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through. Rowan led me into it, and suddenly we were out of the wind, in a narrow passage that angled upward into darkness. Watch your step, he warned. The floor's uneven and there's a drop-off about 30 feet in. We felt our way forward carefully, one hand on the wall. The passage widened, then opened into a larger space. I could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness, could feel the mountain pressing down above us. Rowan struck a match, and in its brief flare, I saw where we were. The cave was larger than I'd expected, maybe 30 feet across and 20 deep. The ceiling was high enough to stand comfortably. In one corner, I could see supplies already stocked, crates, barrels, bundles wrapped in oilcloth. I've been preparing this place for 2 years, Rowan said, lighting a lantern he pulled from the supplies. Just in case. Never thought I'd actually need it. The lantern light revealed more details. A natural chimney in the rock that would vent smoke. A spring bubbling up from the floor, providing fresh water. Relatively level ground where we could sleep. It was crude, primitive, nothing like the cabin we'd left behind. It was also safe, hidden, and utterly unknown to anyone but us. Home sweet home, Rowan said with dark humor, at least until spring. We spent the rest of the day organizing the space, setting up a makeshift camp. Rowan built a small fire in the natural fireplace. I unpacked food and supplies, taking inventory of what we had. Enough for 2 people to survive for months if we were careful. That night, we sat by the fire and listened to the storm raging outside, the wind screaming through the rocks like a living thing. "You saved my life today," Rowan said suddenly. "When you came around behind them. If you'd run like I told you to, I'd probably be dead. Then I guess it's a good thing I don't follow orders well." He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, less haunted. "I noticed. Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "You taught me." "I taught you basics. That shot you made on the man with the oil. That was instinct, natural talent. You've got a gift for it." I looked at my hands, remembering how steady they'd been, how calm I'd felt even in the chaos. Is that a good thing? Being good at killing? It's a necessary thing in a world that sometimes requires killing to survive. He poked at the fire with a stick. "You did what you had to do to protect yourself and someone you cared about. There's no shame in that. Do you think Garrett will really tell them you're dead?" "Maybe. Probably not. But even if he tells the truth, even if they send more men, they won't find us here. This cave doesn't exist on any map, can't be seen from any angle. We're ghosts now, Elena, dead to the world below." Ghosts. The word seemed fitting. We'd both died today in our own ways. Me when I'd taken my first life, him when he'd watched his home burn. The people we'd been this morning no longer existed. But something new was being born in the ashes and the blood and the mountain cold. I lay down that night on a bed of furs and blankets, listening to the storm and the crackling of the fire and Rowan's steady breathing. Outside, the world was trying to kill us with wind and cold and searching men. But inside this cave, hidden in the heart of the mountain, we were safe. I'd started this journey as a victim, a girl who took beatings and believed she deserved them. I'd become something else in that gunfight, someone who fought back, who protected what mattered, who refused to be broken. And as I drifted off to sleep, I realized something profound. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the storm, not of the men who might come looking, not of what tomorrow might bring. For the first time in my life, I was free, and I would kill anyone who tried to take that freedom away. The storm raged for 3 days straight, burying the mountains under snow so deep that the entrance to our cave became completely sealed. We were trapped inside with nothing but firelight, dwindling supplies, and each other. On the 4th morning, I woke to find Rowan already up, staring at the cave entrance where only a faint glow of daylight penetrated through the snow barrier. "We need to dig out," he said without preamble. "Another day and we won't be able to. The snow will compress, turn to ice. We'll be sealed in until spring thaw." We worked for hours, taking turns with a makeshift shovel Rowan fashioned from a flat piece of wood. The snow was dense and heavy, each shovelful an effort. My arms screamed in protest, my back ached, but I kept going. Rowan had taught me that survival meant pushing through pain, meant doing what needed to be done regardless of how you felt about it. When we finally broke through to open air, the world beyond was transformed. Snow covered everything in a blanket so white it hurt to look at in the harsh mountain sunlight. The temperature had dropped even further. My breath froze instantly into ice crystals that hung in the air. "Beautiful," I whispered, staring out at the pristine landscape. "Deadly," Rowan corrected. "Anyone caught out in this without proper shelter would be dead in hours, which means we're safe, at least for now. Nobody's tracking us through this." He was right. The storm had erased every trace of our passage. Even the valley where his cabin had stood was invisible from here, hidden by distance and terrain and the white emptiness of winter. We settled into a rhythm over the following weeks. Rowan would venture out on the rare clear days to hunt, returning with rabbit or ptarmigan, once even a small deer that had wandered too high. I maintained the cave, kept the fire going, rationed our supplies with careful precision. We talked sometimes, long conversations in the firelight about everything and nothing. Other times we sat in comfortable silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I learned things about Rowan I'd never known. He'd grown up in Virginia, the son of a blacksmith. He'd joined the army at 16, lying about his age, desperate to escape his father's fists. He'd fought in 3 wars, earned commendations for bravery, been promoted through the ranks based on merit rather than connections. He'd been proud of his service, believed in what he was doing, until the day he'd received orders that violated everything he stood for. "They wanted us to burn a village," he told me one night. his voice distant. Civilians, families, children, said they were harboring insurgents, providing aid to the enemy. But I'd been to that village. I'd talked to those people. They weren't soldiers, they were just trying to survive. I refused the order. Told my commanding officer that if he wanted that village burned, he'd have to do it himself. What happened? He tried. I stopped him, physically, forcibly, in front of the entire company. Put a gun to his head and told him if he gave that order again, I'd blow his brains out. Rowan's jaw tightened. They arrested me that night. Court-martialed me for insubordination, threatening a superior officer, conduct unbecoming. Never mind that I was right. Never mind that burning that village would have been a war crime. I'd embarrassed powerful men, and powerful men don't forgive that. So they framed you for treason. Added charges, falsified evidence, paid witnesses to lie. By the time the trial was over, I was a monster on paper. Traitor, murderer, deserter, death by hanging, sentenced to be carried out immediately. He looked at his hands, scarred and calloused. I killed 3 guards escaping that prison. Good men, probably, just doing their jobs. But it was them or me, and I wasn't ready to die for someone else's lies. I reached across the space between us and took his hand. You did what you had to do, same as I did when those marshals came. He looked at our joined hands, then at my face. You never flinch anymore. When I move suddenly, when I raise my voice. You used to flinch at everything. It was true. Somewhere in the past weeks, the constant fear had faded. I no longer expected every interaction to end in pain. Hard to flinch around someone who's never given me reason to, I said quietly. Something shifted in his expression. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, seeming to struggle with words. Elena, A sound from outside cut him off. Both of us froze, listening. There it was again. Voices. Distant but unmistakable. Men's voices calling to each other. Rowan's face went hard. He moved to the cave entrance, listening intently. I grabbed the rifle, my heart pounding. How many? I whispered. Can't tell. At least 4, maybe more. He turned back to me and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Not for himself, but for me. They found us. I don't know how, but they found us. What do we do? He was quiet for a long moment, thinking, calculating. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. I'm going to go down there and surrender. What? No, Rowan, they'll kill you. They'll kill us both if they find this cave. But if I go down there, if I give myself up, maybe they'll take me and leave. Maybe they won't search further. Maybe you'll be safe. Absolutely not. I moved between him and the entrance. I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself. We'll fight them off like we did before. Elena, look at the situation. We're trapped in a cave with limited ammunition and no escape route. They've got us cornered. The smart play is for one of us to buy time for the other to survive. Then I'll go. I'll distract them while you No. His voice was sharp, final. I won't let you die for me. Then don't ask me to let you die for me. We stood there, deadlocked, while the voices outside grew closer. I could hear them more clearly now, organized and methodical, searching the area in a grid pattern. Please, Rowan said, and the word nearly broke me. Please, Elena, let me do this one thing right. Let me protect someone who matters. You matter, I said fiercely. You matter to me, and I'm not going to lose you, not to them, not to anyone. Then what do you suggest? Because in about 5 minutes they're going to find this cave, and then all the arguing in the world won't matter. I thought frantically, trying to remember everything he'd taught me about tactics and strategy. We needed an advantage, something they wouldn't expect. Then it hit me. The back of the cave, I said quickly. You said there was a passage you hadn't fully explored. How far does it go? I don't know. I only went about 50 feet before it got too narrow. Could be a dead end, could go on for miles. Then that's our way out. We take what we can carry and we go, right now. Elena, if it's a dead end, we'll be trapped with no way back. And if we stay here, we're definitely dead. At least this gives us a chance. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded sharply. All right, grab the essential supplies. Food, water, ammunition, fire-starting materials. Leave everything else. We moved fast, shoving items into packs with no thought for organization. I could hear the voices getting closer, could hear the crunch of boots on snow. They were maybe 2 minutes away from finding the cave entrance. Rowan lit a small lantern and led the way into the back passage. It started wide enough to walk upright, then quickly narrowed until we had to turn sideways to squeeze through. The walls were rough stone, pressing in from both sides. The air was cold and still, untouched by any wind. Behind us, I heard voices echoing into the main cave. They'd found our shelter. "Keep moving," Rowan urged. "Don't stop. Don't look back." The passage twisted and turned, sometimes widening into small chambers, sometimes narrowing to barely shoulder-width gaps. We pushed forward into the dark, the lantern casting wild shadows on the stone walls. Then Rowan stopped so suddenly I ran into his back. "What?" I whispered. "What is it?" He raised the lantern higher and I saw what had made him stop. The passage opened into a chamber, but this wasn't a natural cave. The walls were too regular, too smooth, and carved into the stone all around us were symbols, ancient, intricate, clearly made by human hands. "What is this place?" I breathed. "I don't know. But people have been here before. Long ago, judging by the wear on these carvings." He moved the lantern around, examining the symbols. "Look, there's another passage on the far side." We crossed the chamber, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stumbled onto something significant, something that had been hidden for a very long time. The new passage sloped downward sharply. We descended carefully, the air growing noticeably warmer as we went deeper. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes, we emerged into another chamber. This one was enormous, and it wasn't empty. The lantern light revealed a vast underground lake, the water so still it looked like black glass. And beyond it, carved into the far wall, was what looked like a door, a massive stone rectangle with more of those strange symbols. "This isn't possible," Rowan said quietly. "We're miles into the mountain. Nothing should be here." "But it is." I walked to the edge of the water, peering across. "Can we get around the lake?" He moved the lantern, following the shoreline. "There's a ledge, narrow but passable. Come on." We edged around this lake, backs pressed to the wall, feet finding purchase on the slick stone. One slip would mean a fall into water of unknown depth, and in this cold, that would be a death sentence. But we made it across to the carved door. Up close, it was even more impressive, easily 10 feet tall and 6 feet wide, covered in symbols that seemed to writhe in the lantern light. "How do we open it?" I asked. Rowan examined the surface, running his hands over the carvings. "There has to be a mechanism, some kind of— Wait!" He pressed on one of the symbols, and something clicked deep within the stone. The door shuddered, then slowly, ponderously, began to swing inward. Beyond was darkness deeper than anything I'd ever seen. "Elena," Rowan said carefully, "I think we should consider turning back. Going through that door, we have no idea where it leads. Could be another dead end, could be a cliff, could be anything." I looked back the way we'd come, thinking of the men searching the cave above, thinking of what would happen if they caught us. "We go forward," I said. "Whatever's through there, it has to be better than what's behind us." He studied my face in the lantern light, then nodded. "Together, then." We stepped through the door into the unknown. The passage beyond was different from the natural caves. This was clearly constructed with smooth floors and straight walls. Someone had built this, had carved it from the living rock with tremendous effort and skill. We walked for what felt like hours, the passage gradually sloping upward. The air grew fresher, colder. And then, finally, I saw light ahead. Not lantern light, but natural daylight filtering in from somewhere above. The passage ended at the base of a vertical shaft. Looking up, I could see sky through an opening maybe 40 feet above us. "A way out," I said. "But how do we climb it?" Rowan examined the walls. "There are handholds. See? Carved into the rock. Someone designed this as an escape route." "From what?" "Does it matter? Right now I'm just grateful it exists." The climb was brutal. My arms shook with exhaustion, my fingers numb from gripping cold stone. But fear drove me upward. Fear of being trapped below. Fear of the men pursuing us. Rowan went first, testing each handhold before trusting his weight to it. I followed, trying not to look down, trying not to think about what would happen if I fell. Finally, blessedly, we pulled ourselves up and out into blinding sunlight. We were on a ledge high on the mountainside, far above where we'd started. Below us, I could see the entire valley spread out, white and pristine. And there, tiny figures moving near where our cave entrance had been. The men searching for us. "They'll never find that passage," Rowan said, breathing hard. "The entrance was too well hidden, too narrow. They'll search the main cave and move on." "Where are we?" He looked around, getting his bearings. "East side of the peak, maybe 2 miles from where we started as the crow flies. There's a hunter's shelter about a mile from here, an old trapper's cabin. If it's still standing, we can hole up there until they give up and leave." We made our way carefully along the ledge, then down through a series of rocky slopes. The going was treacherous, made worse by our exhaustion and the heavy packs, but we pushed on, knowing that stopping meant freezing. The cabin, when we found it, was barely standing. The roof had partially collapsed, and snow had drifted in through gaps in the walls. But it had a fireplace and 4 walls, and right now that was more than enough. We got a fire going and sat huddled near it, trying to thaw out. My hands were so cold they'd gone past pain into numbness. Rowan rubbed them between his own, breathing warm air onto them. "You did good today," he said quietly. "Making the call to go through the passage, keeping your head during the climb. A lot of people would have panicked. I had a good teacher." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Elena, we need to talk about what happens next." My stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" "I mean those men down there. They're not going to stop. They'll search this entire mountain range if they have to, and eventually they're going to find us. We can run, we can hide, but we can't do this forever." "So what are you saying?" He took a deep breath. "I'm saying maybe it's time for me to face what I've been running from. Go back, turn myself in, force them to give me a trial. At least then there's a chance, however small, of justice." "They'll kill you." My voice was flat. "You saw those orders. They want you dead, not in a courtroom." "Then they'll kill me. But at least you'll be safe. At least they won't have any reason to keep hunting." I pulled my hands away from his. "Is that what you think I want? To be safe while you die? After everything we've been through, you still don't understand." "Understand what?" "That I'd rather die fighting beside you than live knowing I let you surrender to killers." The words burst out of me, raw and fierce. "You saved me from a life of being beaten and broken. You taught me to fight, to survive, to believe I was worth something. And now you want me to just walk away and save myself while you throw your life away?" "I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protecting. I need you to stop treating me like I'm still that terrified girl from Coldridge. I've killed men, Rowan. I've climbed mountains and survived storms and walked through ancient passages in the dark. I'm not weak. I'm not helpless. And I'm not leaving you." He stared at me, something shifting behind his eyes. "You're serious?" "Completely. Elena, you don't know what you're asking. If I go on the run, really run, it means living like this forever. Always moving, always hiding, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. It means cold and hunger and constant danger. It means being alive," I interrupted, "and being free, and being together. That's enough for me. Is it enough for you?" The silence stretched between us, filled only by the crackling of the fire. Then Rowan said, very quietly, "When did you become the brave one?" "When you showed me I could be." He reached out and cupped my face in his scarred, calloused hand. "I don't deserve you. Don't deserve your loyalty or your courage or your faith in me. Too bad. You're stuck with me anyway." He laughed then, a real laugh that transformed his face. All right, you stubborn, impossible woman. We'll run, but we do it smart. We plan, we prepare, and we don't take stupid risks." "Agreed. So what's the plan?" He pulled out the map he always carried, spreading it on the floor near the fire. "We can't stay in these mountains. They know the general area now. We need to get far away, somewhere they won't think to look." "How far?" "Canada, maybe. Or Mexico. Somewhere across a border where their authority doesn't reach." His finger traced routes on the map. "But we can't go now. Winter's got the passes blocked. We'd die before we made it 10 miles. So we wait for spring. And we stay mobile, Keep moving, never more than a few days in any location. Live light, live smart, and stay ahead of anyone hunting us. I looked at the map, at the vast distances involved, at the rivers and ranges that stood between us and freedom. It seemed impossible. But then again, a month ago it had seemed impossible that I'd ever escape Coldridge, that I'd ever learn to fight, to shoot, to survive, that I'd ever feel anything other than fear. Impossible didn't mean much anymore. When spring comes, I said, we'll need supplies, money. We can't cross a border with nothing. I've got gold cached in 3 different locations in these mountains. Not a fortune, but enough to get us started somewhere new. He looked at me seriously. But Elena, you need to understand, once we do this, there's no going back, no return to normal life. We'll be fugitives forever. I know. You'll never see Coldridge again, never see anyone from your old life. Good. There's nothing in Coldridge I want to see ever again. You might feel differently later, might regret. I pressed my fingers to his lips, silencing him. Rowan Hale, stop trying to talk me out of this. I know what I'm choosing, I know what I'm giving up, and I'm telling you it's worth it. He caught my hand, held it against his face. Why? Why would you tie yourself to a hunted man with no future? Because you're the first person who ever saw me as something more than a burden or a target. Because you taught me I could be strong. Because when I'm with you, I'm not afraid. I took a breath. And because I love you. The words hung in the air between us, impossible to take back. Rowan's eyes widened. Elena, you don't have to say it back, I said quickly. I just needed you to know, needed you to understand why I'm not leaving. He pulled me close, wrapping me in his arms, and I could feel him trembling. I've been alone for so long, he said against my hair. So long that I forgot what it felt like to care about someone more than yourself. But you changed that. You made me remember what I was fighting for. Not just survival, but something worth surviving for. He pulled back just enough to look at me. I love you too. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. I kissed him then, there in that broken cabin with snow falling outside and danger all around, and it felt like coming home. We spent that night planning our future, mapping routes and discussing strategies. When spring came, we'd retrieve his cached gold and head north through the high passes. We'd cross into Canada and disappear into the vast wilderness there. Maybe find a remote homestead. Maybe just keep moving. The details didn't matter as much as the simple fact that we'd be together. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, we packed up and prepared to move again. One more thing, Rowan said as we were about to leave. He pulled out the leather folder of papers, the ones we'd taken from Marshal Garrett. These orders, this letter from Colonel Hartwell, this is proof of what they tried to do. Proof that they ordered my execution without trial. What are you going to do with them? Keep them safe. Because someday, if the opportunity presents itself, I'm going to use them to bring down every man involved in this. Not for revenge, but for justice. For every soldier they've wronged, every person they've hurt, every life they've destroyed with their corruption. That's a dangerous dream. Maybe, but it's one worth having. He carefully folded the papers and tucked them inside his coat. Come on, we've got miles to cover before dark. We left the cabin and headed deeper into the wilderness, 2 fugitives against the world, but together. And somehow, that made all the difference. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Elena's life, and somehow also the most alive she'd ever felt. They moved like shadows through the mountains, never staying more than 2 nights in any location. Rowan taught her to read the land the way he did, to see signs that others would miss, disturbed snow that meant someone had passed through, animal tracks that told stories of what had happened hours before, the way smoke dispersed that could reveal a campfire miles away. They survived on what they could hunt and the carefully rationed supplies from Rowan's caches. Elena learned to set snares, to fish through ice, to find edible roots beneath the snow. Her hands grew calloused, her body lean and hard. The girl who'd flinched at shadows became a woman who could track a deer for 3 miles without making a sound. But it was exhausting, relentless. Every morning brought new challenges, new dangers, and always, hanging over them like a storm cloud, was the knowledge that men were searching for them. They saw evidence of it twice. Once, smoke from a campfire in a valley they'd been planning to cross. They detoured 20 miles to avoid it. Another time, fresh tracks in the snow. 6 men, heavily armed, moving in a search pattern. They hid for 16 hours in a cave barely large enough for both of them, pressed together in the dark, breathing as quietly as possible while the searchers passed within 30 yards. "They're not giving up," Elena whispered after the men had moved on. "No," Rowan agreed, his voice grim. "They're not." It was during the 3rd month, as winter began its slow retreat and the first hints of spring appeared in the valleys below, that everything changed. They were camped in a small grove of trees, taking advantage of a rare sunny day to dry out their gear and rest. Elena was mending a tear in her coat when Rowan suddenly went rigid, staring down the mountain. "What is it?" she asked, already reaching for her rifle. "Smoke. A lot of it." He pointed, and she saw what he'd seen, a thick column of black smoke rising from somewhere far below. "That's not a campfire. That's a building burning." They watched the smoke for several minutes, trying to gauge distance and direction. "It's coming from near Coldridge," Elena said slowly. "Or what used to be Coldridge. We should stay away. Could be a trap, could be anything." But something gnawed at Elena, a feeling she couldn't quite name. "What if it's not? What if someone needs help?" "Elena, we can't risk—" I know we can't. But Rowan, what if there are people down there, people who are hurt or trapped? Could we really just walk away?" He looked at her for a long moment. 3 months ago, you would have said yes without hesitation. That survival comes first. 3 months ago, I was still learning what it meant to be human again. You taught me that. She met his eyes. You also taught me that we don't become monsters just because monsters are hunting us. He sighed, but she could see the resignation in his expression. He'd already decided to go check it out. He'd just been hoping she'd talk him out of it. "We scout only," he said firmly. "We get close enough to see what's happening, and if there's any sign of trouble, we leave immediately. Agreed?" "Agreed." They approached Coldridge carefully, using every scrap of cover the terrain provided. As they got closer, the smoke grew thicker, and Elena could smell it. Not just wood burning, but something else. Something chemical and wrong. The town came into view from a ridge overlooking the valley, and what Elena saw made her stomach drop. Coldridge was burning. Not the controlled burn of a single building, but a deliberate systematic destruction. Nearly every structure was ablaze, and moving through the streets were men in military uniforms. They were going door to door, dragging out anyone they found, lining them up in the town square. "They're punishing them," Elena breathed, horror flooding through her. "Punishing the whole town for harboring us." "We weren't harbored. We weren't even there." But Rowan's face had gone pale. "They don't care. This is a message. This is what happens to any place they think helped me." Elena watched through Rowan's spyglass as soldiers roughly handled the townspeople she'd grown up around. There was Mr. Phillips, dragged from his burning store. Mrs. Chen, holding her children close while a soldier shouted in her face. Old Garrett, lying in the street, not moving. And there, being pulled from a shack that was already half collapsed, was Margaret Ward. Elena's mother looked smaller than she remembered, shrunken and old. A soldier threw her to the ground, and she stayed there, not fighting back, just covering her head with her arms. "We have to do something," Elena said. "Elena, there are at least 30 soldiers down there. We'd be dead before we got halfway to town. So we just watch? Just let them burn everything and hurt everyone? What do you want me to do?" His voice was anguished. "I can't save them. I can barely keep us alive." She knew he was right. Knew that charging down there would accomplish nothing except getting them both killed. But watching those people suffer, knowing it was happening because soldiers were looking for her and Rowan, was unbearable. Then she saw him. A tall man in an officer's uniform, supervising the destruction with calm efficiency. Even from this distance, she could see the insignia on his coat. "That's him," Rowan said quietly. "Colonel Hartwell, the man who gave the orders." Elena looked at Rowan and saw something new in his expression. Not fear, not resignation, but a cold, calculating fury. "I'm going down there," he said. "What? No, you just said—" "I know what I said, but this is my fault. These people are suffering because of me. And that man down there, he's the one who's been orchestrating all of it. The frame-up, the hunt, all of it. He checked his rifle, his movements mechanical. If I can get to him, if I can take him out, maybe the rest of them will pull back. Maybe Coldridge will be left alone. That's suicide. Even if you get to him, you'll never get out alive. Probably not. He looked at her, and his eyes were sad but resolved. Which is why you're not coming with me. Rowan, Elena, listen to me. You've got the map to the gold caches. You know the route north. If I don't come back, you take that gold and you run. You cross into Canada and you build a new life. You find happiness and safety and everything you deserve. I deserve to fight beside you. No, his voice was firm. You deserve to live, and if I die making sure that happens, then that's a trade I'm willing to make. She grabbed his arm, desperate. Please don't do this, please. We'll find another way, He kissed her, hard and fierce, like he was trying to memorize the feel of her. When he pulled back, there were tears on his cheeks. I love you, he said, and that's why I have to do this, because love means protecting what matters, even if it costs everything. He pulled away from her grip and started down the mountain. Elena stood frozen for 3 heartbeats, watching him go, her mind racing through options and finding none that didn't end in disaster. Then she made a decision. She wasn't going to let him die alone. She circled wide, moving fast, using the smoke as cover. If Rowan was going to make a suicidal charge at Colonel Hartwell, the least she could do was provide a distraction, create enough chaos that maybe, just maybe, he'd have a chance. She worked her way to the east side of town, to where Phillips' general store was burning. The building was fully engulfed, but the storage shed behind it was still intact. She knew that Mr. Phillips kept ammunition there, boxes and boxes of it. If that shed went up, it would be like a string of firecrackers. Loud, chaotic, and attention-grabbing. She got as close as she dared, then fired 3 shots into the shed's wall, right where she knew the ammunition was stored. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the world exploded. The blast was enormous, a rolling boom that shook the ground and sent debris flying in every direction. Soldiers dove for cover, shouting in confusion. The townspeople scattered, and in the chaos, Elena saw Rowan moving through the smoke, heading straight for Colonel Hartwell. She provided covering fire, picking off soldiers who got too close to him. Not killing shots. She aimed for legs, shoulders, anywhere that would put them down without killing them. These were just men following orders. Hartwell was the one who deserved death. Rowan reached the colonel just as Hartwell was pulling his sidearm. They went down in a tangle of limbs, fighting viciously in the dirt. Elena kept shooting, keeping the other soldiers back, but she was running out of ammunition. Her rifle clicked empty. She had maybe 6 bullets left for her revolver. And then she saw him, Marshal Garrett, the man they'd let go, raising his rifle toward Rowan's back. She didn't think, just aimed and fired. Garrett went down, clutching his arm, the rifle falling from his grip. But the shot had given away her position. Soldiers turned toward her, weapons raised. She ran, ducking behind buildings, using every trick Rowan had taught her. But there were too many of them, and she was one person with almost no ammunition. A soldier stepped out in front of her, rifle leveled at her chest. "Don't move!" She raised her hand slowly, mind racing. This was it. This was where it ended. Then a shot rang out, and the soldier dropped. Elena spun to see someone emerging from the smoke, a woman, maybe 60 years old, holding a hunting rifle with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. Mrs. Chen. "You're that ward girl," Mrs. Chen said calmly, working the bolt on her rifle. "The one they're burning our town over." "I'm sorry," Elena said. "I never meant for any of this." "Save it. You didn't burn our town. They did." She jerked her head toward the soldiers. "Now, are you just going to stand there, or are you going to help us fight back?" Around them, other townspeople were emerging from hiding, armed with whatever they could find. Old Garrett, not dead after all, limped forward with a shotgun. Mr. Phillips appeared with a revolver. Even some of the miners, men Elena barely knew, stepped up with rifles in grim determination. "They came into our town," Mr. Phillips said quietly, "burned our homes, threatened our families, all because they think we helped you. Well, hell, might as well make it worth it." The tide turned. The soldiers found themselves facing not just 2 fugitives, but an entire town that had decided it had been pushed far enough. The fight was vicious and close quarters, the smoke making it hard to see friend from foe. Elena fought her way toward where she'd last seen Rowan, reloading her revolver with the last of her ammunition. She found him still grappling with Colonel Hartwell, both men bloody and exhausted. Hartwell had a knife in his hand, was bringing it down toward Rowan's throat. Elena shot him. The colonel fell backward, clutching his shoulder, the knife clattering away. Rowan scrambled to his feet, breathing hard. "I told you to run," he said, "and I told you I don't follow orders well." More soldiers were converging on their position. They were surrounded, outgunned, and running on empty. "This is it," Rowan said quietly. "We made a good run of it." Elena took his hand, squeezed it once. "Together. Together." Then a voice cut through the chaos, loud and authoritative. "Cease fire! Everyone, cease fire immediately!" The shooting stuttered to a halt. Elena turned to see a man in a military uniform striding through the smoke, but this wasn't one of Hartwell's men. The insignia on his coat marked him as a general, and he carried himself with the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. "What in hell is going on here?" the general demanded. Colonel Hartwell struggled to his feet, still clutching his wounded shoulder. "General Morrison, sir, we were apprehending a fugitive by burning down an entire town." Morrison's voice was ice. "By attacking civilians? By conducting what appears to be an unsanctioned military operation on American soil?" "Sir, I have authorization." "Show me." Hartwell hesitated, and in that hesitation, Elena saw everything. He didn't have authorization. This whole thing had been his personal vendetta, his attempt to eliminate Rowan before the truth about the frame-up could come to light. Rowan must have seen it too, because he reached into his coat and pulled out the leather folder they'd taken from Marshal Garrett. "General Morrison," Rowan called out. "I'm Captain Rowan Hale, formerly of the 7th Infantry. I was court-martialed and sentenced to death for refusing an unlawful order. This folder contains evidence that Colonel Hartwell ordered my execution without trial, and that my entire court-martial was fabricated to cover up war crimes." Morrison took the folder, read through it carefully. With each page, his expression grew darker. "Colonel Hartwell," he said finally, his voice dangerously quiet, "you are hereby relieved of command and placed under arrest for falsifying military documents, ordering extrajudicial killings, and conducting unauthorized military operations. Sergeant, take him into custody." Hartwell's face went from red to white. "Sir, you don't understand. Hale is dangerous. He killed 3 guards. Guards who were part of an unlawful execution," Morrison interrupted. "An execution you ordered based on charges you fabricated. I've read the documents, Colonel. I've seen your handwriting, your seal. You didn't just cross the line, you obliterated it." He turned to Rowan. "Captain Hale, I'm not going to pretend this situation is simple. You did escape military custody. You did kill 3 men. Those are facts that will need to be addressed. But in light of this evidence, I'm prepared to offer you a deal." "What kind of deal?" Rowan asked warily. "You agree to testify against Colonel Hartwell and anyone else involved in your frame-up. You provide a full account of what happened, including the original unlawful orders you refused. In return, I'll personally see to it that your case is reviewed by an independent tribunal. I can't promise they'll exonerate you, but I can promise you a fair hearing. An actual trial, not the sham court-martial Hartwell arranged." Rowan looked at Elena. She could see him weighing the options, trying to decide if this was genuine or just another trap. "If I refuse," he asked, "then you remain a fugitive, hunted by every lawman in the territory. Eventually, someone will catch you, and when they do, you'll hang without ever having a chance to clear your name." Morrison's voice softened slightly. "Captain, I read your service record before I came here. You were a good soldier, a good man. You don't deserve what happened to you. Let me help you make it right." Elena squeezed Rowan's hand. "Your choice," she said quietly. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." He looked at the burning town, at the people who'd risked their lives to help them, at Elena standing beside him covered in soot and blood, but unbroken. Then he looked at General Morrison. "I want guarantees," he said, "in writing, that the tribunal will be independent, that I'll have access to counsel, that no harm will come to Elena Ward or anyone in this town for helping me. Done. And I want Colonel Hartwell and everyone involved in the cover-up prosecuted to the fullest extent of military law." That was already going to happen, Morrison gestured to his men. Get these fires under control. Anyone injured needs medical attention, civilian or military. And someone find these people shelter. They're not spending the night in the snow. The next hours were a blur. The fires were extinguished. The wounded were treated. Temporary shelters were erected. And through it all, Elena stayed close to Rowan, unwilling to let him out of her sight. As night fell, Morrison approached them where they sat near one of the campfires. "The paperwork is drawn up," he said, handing several documents to Rowan. "Everything we agreed to, in writing and witnessed. You'll be transported to Denver tomorrow under my personal supervision. The tribunal will convene within 2 weeks." "What about Elena?" Rowan asked. Morrison looked at her. "Miss Ward isn't wanted for any crime. She's free to go wherever she chooses." "I'm going with Rowan," Elena said immediately. Morrison raised an eyebrow. "To Denver? To sit through a military tribunal?" "To the ends of the earth if necessary." A slight smile crossed the general's face. "You've got a loyal woman there, Captain. Don't take that for granted." "Never have," Rowan said quietly. "Never will." Morrison left them alone, and they sat together in the firelight, processing everything that had happened. "I never thought this day would come," Rowan said. "The chance to actually prove I was right, to hold accountable the men who framed me." "Are you scared?" "Terrified. What if the tribunal doesn't believe me? What if they decide the evidence is fabricated? What if—" Elena pressed her fingers to his lips, just like she had that day in the cabin. "Then we run. We take your gold and we disappear into Canada like we planned. But Rowan, you deserve the chance to clear your name. You deserve justice." "So do you. Justice for what your mother did, for what this town let happen to you." She looked across the camp to where her mother sat, guarded by 2 of Morrison's soldiers. Margaret Ward looked old and broken, all her cruelty burned away to leave only a hollow shell. "I don't need justice from her," Elena said quietly. "I just need her to never be able to hurt me again. And she can't. She has no power over me anymore." The trial, when it came 2 weeks later, was everything Morrison had promised and more. Independent judges, full access to evidence, proper legal representation. Elena sat in the gallery every day, watching as Rowan testified, as witnesses were called, as the full extent of Colonel Hartwell's corruption was laid bare. The case was damning. Hartwell had falsified documents, bribed witnesses, and orchestrated an entire court-martial to eliminate a subordinate who'd threatened to expose his war crimes. More than that, the investigation uncovered a network of corruption extending far beyond Rowan's case. Dozens of soldiers had been wrongly accused, imprisoned, or executed to maintain Hartwell's cover-up. When the verdict came down, Elena held her breath. "In the matter of Captain Rowan Hale," the lead judge intoned, "this tribunal finds that the original court-martial was conducted improperly and was based on fabricated evidence. The charges of treason and desertion are hereby dismissed with prejudice." Elena felt tears streaming down her face. "However," the judge continued, "the matter of the deaths of 3 guards during Captain Hale's escape must be addressed. While the tribunal acknowledges that Captain Hale reasonably believed he was facing unlawful execution, the use of lethal force was still a violation of military law." Her heart sank. "Therefore, this tribunal sentences Captain Hale to time served, given the 3 months he has already spent as a fugitive under extraordinary circumstances. He is hereby honorably discharged from military service with full pension and benefits restored." The courtroom erupted. Elena pushed through the crowd to reach Rowan, who looked like he couldn't quite believe what he'd just heard. "You're free," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "You're actually free." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "We're free," he corrected. "Both of us." They left Denver a week later, once all the paperwork was finalized and Rowan's discharge was official. They took the gold he'd cached, along with the pension payment the Army gave him, and headed north. But they didn't go to Canada. Instead, they went back to the mountains, back to the valley where Rowan's cabin had stood. The burned ruins had been covered by spring growth, wildflowers pushing up through the ash. It was beautiful and sad and full of promise. "We could rebuild," Rowan said quietly. "Build something new here. Something that's ours, not haunted by the past." "Or we could build somewhere else," Elena suggested. Somewhere with neighbors, with a town nearby. Somewhere we don't have to hide. He looked at her. You'd want that? After everything? I spent my whole life hiding, either from my mother's fists or from soldiers hunting us. I'm tired of hiding. I want to live somewhere we can have friends, be part of a community. I want to wake up in the morning and not have to check for soldiers on the ridge. That sounds, he paused, searching for the word, normal. Terrifyingly, wonderfully normal. They found a small valley in Montana, far from Coldridge, but not so remote that they'd be isolated. They bought land with Rowan's gold and pension, built a cabin with their own hands, and slowly, carefully, built a life. Rowan worked as a carpenter, his military discipline and attention to detail making him sought after for quality work. Elena started a small garden that grew each year, eventually supplying vegetables to half the county. They made friends, became part of the community, attended church socials and town meetings. It was everything Elena had never dared to dream of. 2 years after the trial, on a spring morning when the valley was green and alive, Elena found Rowan at the edge of their property, looking out at the mountains in the distance. Thinking about the past, she asked, slipping her hand into his. Thinking about how far we've come. 2 years ago, we were fugitives with nothing but each other and the clothes on our backs. Now look at us. She looked. At the cabin they'd built together, solid and warm. At the garden bursting with new growth. At the neighbors' smoke rising in the distance. At the life they'd carved out of hardship and hope. No regrets? She asked. Only one. He turned to face her, and she saw mischief in his eyes. I regret that I haven't properly asked you something important. He knelt down in the grass, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. Elena Ward, you saved my life in more ways than I can count. You gave me a reason to fight when I was ready to give up. You stood beside me through hell and came out stronger. Will you marry me? She pulled him to his feet, laughing. I've been yours since the day you paid gold to take me away from hell. But yes, Rowan Hale, yes, I'll marry you. They married that summer in the small church in town, surrounded by friends and neighbors who knew nothing of their violent past and didn't need to. They were just Rowan and Elena, the quiet couple who'd come from somewhere east and built a good life through honest work and stubborn determination. On their wedding night, lying together in the cabin they'd built, Elena thought about the girl she'd been in Coldridge, that terrified, broken girl who'd believed she deserved the pain, who'd thought she'd never escape. That girl was gone, burned away in gunfire and mountain storms and the slow, steady building of something better. In her place was a woman who knew her own strength, who'd faced death and chosen life, who'd found love in the last place she expected. What are you thinking? Rowan murmured against her hair. I'm thinking about how they say some people are born broken, she said quietly. How violence finds you because you deserve it. How silence is safer than screaming. You don't believe that anymore. No, I believe that broken things can be rebuilt. That silence is just another kind of death. And that the most dangerous thing in the world isn't violence, it's giving up. He tightened his arms around her. I'm glad you never gave up. I'm glad you showed me I didn't have to. Years later, travelers through Montana would sometimes hear stories about a couple who lived in a small valley near the mountains. The stories varied. Some said they were former outlaws, others that they'd survived some terrible tragedy. A few claimed they'd disappeared into the mountains and returned changed, like people reborn. The truth was simpler and more profound. They were two people who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to walk into the light together. They'd faced everything the world could throw at them and refused to break. They'd lost everything and built something better from the ashes. They were proof that the past doesn't have to define you, that cruelty doesn't have to win, that even in the darkest moments, hope can survive. They were Rowan and Elena Hale, and they'd earned their peace one brutal step at a time. And in the end, that was enough.